Hello, and thank you for taking time out of your day to learn about how your organization can continuously monitor and intelligently respond to evolving cyber risk. Today, we're logged in as Andrew Taylor, which has a view of risk management where he can effectively communicate with stakeholders across the organization through integrated reporting of that current risk supported by the Now platform. So what Andrew is able to see is those entities with the highest risk in the organization, different areas that risk lies, and ultimately that risk plotted on a heat map. What we can do is expand that heat map to get an even deeper view into those risks. And on the right-hand side, we can see the risk register items color-coded to where they lie on the graph. So there's a lot of flexibility in this reporting, the ability to filter by entity and see exactly the risk you need. If we go back to the dashboard, there'll be some tasks that Andrew will be able to complete on the right, some quick actions that he can launch. And down below, we can see what areas have the highest risk, what tasks need to be completed, what controls need to be implemented, what risk events have been triggered, and then ultimately what issues have arisen out of that. But today, what I really want to focus on is our ability to perform risk and control self-assessment using automated factors. So what I can do is drill into a particular risk here, for example, loss of availability. We can see where that risk lies within the organization, Grace being the owner of that risk, categorized by IT or maybe enterprise risk. And down below, we get an idea of the status of the risk. It's already been completed, and we're in that monitoring phase. So from the assessments that have been performed, there's been a high inherent and residual because the controls that are in place are not effectively mitigating that risk. So let's go into a risk assessment and see why that is. So drilling into a risk assessment that was performed by Grace and approved by James, what we can see is the different inherent and residual ratings both being high, and then that control effectiveness being ineffective, ultimately driving that high residual score. So we're using a lot of automated factors so we don't have that subjectivity that the human element brings in. But when Grace logs in, they'll see a very similar view to this. On the right-hand side, they'll have information on what is requested of them and what needs to be completed. And if we want to, we can drill in and see that assessment. So starting off on the inherent assessment, Grace provided the impact and likelihood, and we were able to combine those to get an overall score of the inherent risk. Next, Grace would have gone on to fill out that control assessment. So controls are brought in, we can see their compliance status, and then ultimately, if there's any indicators, which is our automated testing method, we're able to pull those in and show how this is automatically failing. Now, there's still manual testing methods like a design or operating effectiveness. The design effectiveness here being effective, the system is taking into factor all those different methods, including the indicators and more manual testing methods to get you an overall compliance rating, this one being ineffective. So that will then drive our calculated overall residual score, which is then high. And Grace is asked to give a risk response. So the risk response here being mitigate, but she could have easily chose to reduce, transfer, avoid, or accept that risk and provide their comments below. So once this was approved, we're able to see that score. And ultimately, what we can do now is look at the controls that are in place to mitigate that risk. So we saw that one of the controls was failing and non-compliant. So we can see that the perform external vulnerability scans on the organization's system is failing. And if you remember, that was failing because of the indicator that was tied to it. So jumping into here, we get an overall view of that being non-compliant. Right up front, we're told why the reason is that indicator is failing. And then if we want to, we can jump into the indicator. Indicators here are a way that we can automatically track the effectiveness of a particular control. And to get started, we can take advantage of CIS controls, which I'll talk about in a moment. or we can inherit them from templates and replicate those throughout the organization for something like this about vulnerability scanning. Jumping into the indicator template, gives you the ability to replicate this throughout the organization. We can see what type it is, whether it's automated or manual, this one being automated. We're grabbing that vulnerability data and seeing how many times it's performed. So we're counting how many times, and if it's over one time, we give that a pass. But right now, it's not being performed, so it's getting a 0. And then down below, you can set additional criteria, such as where it's targeting. For this example, it's inside the ServiceNow platform or CMDB. And that information is being collected on a weekly basis and recalculated. So that's the template that we pulled from. And now if we go back to the indicator, you can see that we pulled from that template and tied it to a particular entity and a control. All the other information is inherited from the template. And then down below, we can see, again, how frequently it's being collected and ultimately the result of it being failed. Jumping back to the control, we can see the indicator that failed and ultimately an issue that arose out of that. Jumping into the issue, this is where we would assign it out to an individual IT owner or the business owner to ultimately understand the issue and remediate that. Lastly, once we performed a risk assessment, understand that the mitigating controls tied in those automated factors, what we're able to do is respond to mitigating that risk. In this case, the risk response task has been automatically generated and assigned to Grace to be the respondent. This task helps users to determine if a vulnerability scan might be needed or if adding more controls might be a better suited solution. Now you might be asking, how do we define these indicators? What we have is the Technology Controls Monitoring Accelerator. This provides CIS controls to jumpstart in defining and monitoring those indicators. So this can be downloaded and imported into the environment, aligned to your different areas, and used as a baseline to get you started. Thank you for taking your time today to understand how we can improve decisions or performance with risk intelligence embedded in daily work and integrated across the enterprise. For any questions, please reach out to your team or visit servicenow.com/risk. Thank you.